Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our special workshop this evening. It's July 22nd, 2024, and I just want to let everyone know in the audience that this is a workshop we normally do in the morning, so we're not taking public comment tonight. You're welcome to stay and watch. We won't make any final decisions tonight. We'll vote on whatever happens tonight at a subsequent meeting that we do not yet have scheduled. So just to let you know up front, no comment. Other than that, we're talking about time, place, manner code regarding our city parks and public spaces, and our city manager is going to be leading the presentation. You are ready to go ahead and start, Aaron, whenever you're ready.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the public. We are here today to review some draft time, place, and manner codes in compliance with House Bill 3115. This does support Council's leadership by ensuring proper policy development occurs in compliance with state law and to enact reasonable time, place, and manner regulations aiming to preserve the city's ability to manage public space effectively for the benefit in the entire community. I do want to give a shout out to a few individuals and others. One, I want to give a shout out to Council for wanting to address this in a quick fashion, and with the amount of time and energy that you've put into it in preparation for tonight. Greatly appreciate that. And I also want to give a shout out to an amazing staff from the police department, Chief, the Public Works Department, Jason, our GIS system, the CRT group, from Karen. There's been so many people that have taken some extra effort in order to get this to the position that it is today. So Council has something from a policy perspective to review. It was a lot of work in the background. I also want to thank one individual specifically and give a special shout out to that, and that's Aaron Heisel. Aaron Heisel is with us tonight, and he is virtually on, so his voice will be heard if you have questions. But I also want to give that special shout out to Aaron because he's on vacation with his family, and he's been working on this for the past 4 days, and even probably a little bit more. And it's not been without interruptions from the chief and myself asking questions or, hey, what about this? And Aaron Heisel's response throughout this whole process is amazing. Just wanted to make that comment on how vested he is in making sure that our community is successful in implementing our own time, place, and manner regulations. So, Aaron, thank you very much for your efforts in helping us get to where we are today.
You're welcome.
So we have two draft ordinances for your consideration. Option one is a listing of places excluded. So it's an exclusion type of ordinance. Draft ordinance option two is a listing of inclusion. So it's an inclusion type of ordinance. So for the agenda today, I thought what I would do is the way I've got it set it up is that we would review the like language between the two drafts for you. So we'll just go through. Here is the foundation. We have a foundation that the definitions are the same. The removal of campsites on public property, the disposition and release of personal property, and the mitigation and penalties are the same for those two. So let's go through and let's look at those foundational items. And if you have questions, and make sure that we're all on the same page there. Then what we'll do is we'll break into reviewing the key differences held in the two options, which are under 5.61.030, which is the camping regulated for inclusion and exclusion. And then council questions, deliberation, direction. So getting started with the things that are in common with the two drafts. Most codes and ordinances for the public's perception, if you look at a code and ordinance when it comes to either a state level, from Oregon revised statutes to local codes, it always starts with definitions. So you always start with your definitions so you have a background of what you're talking about in the verbiage and the rest of the code. So I'm going to go through and talk about the definitions that are in the code today. The definitions are as follows. A, to camp means to maintain a campsite in a single location of city property for more than 24 hours. B, campsite means a location upon city property where camping materials are placed. C, camping materials include but are not limited to tents, huts, awnings, lean-tos, chairs, tarps, portable stoves, and other collections of personal property that are or reasonably appear to be arranged in or used as camping accommodations. Further definitions defined in this code are city property, which means all property, parks, right-of-way, parking lots, easements, or other land owned, leased, controlled, or managed by the City of Grants Pass. E, personal property, which means any item that can be reasonably identified as belonging to an individual and that has apparent value or utility. Definition of relocate means to move both individuals and our personal property off of city property or to a different authorized city property. This definition does not include moving to another portion of the same city property.
Aaron,
I think there's a question.
can I ask a question on the previous slide? The definition of to camp calls out 24 hours. The definition of campsite does not, and this might be a question for Aaron Heisel. So I could see a situation where, camping materials like chairs are placed and they're not camping, but under this definition, that would be a campsite. So just something for Aaron to maybe consider if having 24 hours under campsite is also appropriate. I don't know if he has it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think that's all intentional, and that's to avoid incidentally regulating sleeping and or, like you're saying, putting a chair down, those types of things. Even if it looked like a campsite, it wouldn't trigger to where it was actually camping until it was there for the 24 hours.
Great, thank
So
you.
there wouldn't be a reason to put it in both. They complement each other in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Rick has a question as well.
Aaron, could you go back to slide 6, please?
Back to slide 6. I don't have the
I think it's
slide.
forward. It has
F.
D.
F, yes.
There you go.
So it's relocate means both the individual and personal property. Should it say and or? Because what happens if a person is not there, but all their equipment is there, and we want to relocate it? When I read that definition, it sounds like the person and the property need to both be there. Aaron, I don't know if you want to respond to that. Aaron Heisel.
Yeah, I know you're talking Aaron Heisel.
I think it would be fine and read just fine with and/or. So if that is a direction of change that you guys would like, that would be fine. I don't think it is necessary because you're talking about relocating and it means both the individual and any personal property of theirs. But and or would both be appropriate there.
Thank you.
I will move on. So there's also another one that's the same. That's 5.61.050, removal of campsite on public property. The city shall remove individuals, personal property, camping materials, and campsites from city property consistent with ORS 195, 505, and 510. Next is disposition and release of personal property. Items having no apparent utility or monetary value and items in an unsanitary condition may be discarded. Weapons, drugs, paraphernalia, items appearing to be stolen, and evidence of a crime may be retained as evidence by police department until an alternative disposition is determined. All personal property removed from a campsite, which is not disposed of or held as evidence as provided above, shall be stored by the police department for a minimum of 30 days, during which time it shall be reasonably available for and released to an individual confirming ownership consistent with ORS 195, 505. And that's related to the recent House bill that we talked about in the previous meeting.
Valerie.
Yeah, I just want clarification. I think I know what it is, but when you above that and below, when you're talking 195.505, that's the 72-hour?
Yes.
Is correct? I just want to say, in
Yeah,
case
the
anybody's
previous
not coming
slide.
with there. It's
Yes,
it's
that's
72
consistent
hours.
with the 72-hour.
Thank you.
I remember when we talked to Aaron Heisel before, there was some conversation about items having no apparent utility or monetary value or being in an unsanitary condition, and how there's quite a bit of subjectivity there. And it was my recollection that he kind of tried to shy us away from that language. Aaron, am I remembering that correctly?
I'm going to answer the question very directly without referring back to our privileged conversations. The language still exists in state law, so it is unavoidable at this point, but it does have some subjectivity and some gray areas that are problematic on the enforcement side. I think it's still appropriate to use it here because it is baked into the state law as we currently sit. And all of those gray areas, subjectivity, those issues really just are in determining what really is of no use or utility, what is so unsanitary that we really can't store it or shouldn't store it for other reasons. Those types of things are where kind of the problems arise. In my conversations with the chief and your guys' rollout of body cams, I think that we can eliminate a lot of the question marks that arise through good documentation when those tough decisions are going to have to be made.
Great, thank you.
All right. So under mitigation and penalties, in both of the options in front of you, A, upon conviction of a violation of this chapter, in addition to any other factors deemed appropriate by the court shall consider in mitigation whether or not persons immediately removed all personal property and litter, including but not limited bottles, cans, and garbage from the campsite after being informed they were in violation of the law. Upon conviction of a violation of this chapter, if an individual demonstrates that after receiving the citation and before the hearing, they meaningfully engaged with private resources and or service providers to address whatever led them to be in violation, the court shall consider that information determining the appropriate penalty. Okay. So another one that is in both of the options in front of you today is continuing under mitigation and penalties. C, violation of this chapter is a violation punishable by a fine of not more than $50. That has been reduced from our previous fine. In the court case's discretion, alternative penalties intended to address the reasons the individual was in violation of the chapter may be imposed. These alternative penalties may not include a term of imprisonment, but are otherwise as broad as permissible by ORS.
Brian?
Just to clarify how that fine would work, is that something that would be $50 a day, or like what is the time interval at which they could be re-cited?
You could technically be cited multiple times in a day. However, that's not going to happen. So it's $50 per citation. And typically, people might see multiple citations per week, depending on the individual.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so those were the commonalities between the two options. Now I'm prepared to go through and highlight the draft ordinance option number 1, listing of places excluded only. So for your information, this is the option 1 ordinance, which lists, it's an ordinance that focuses on exclusion and defines the excluded areas. Starting with 5.61030, camping regulated. No person may occupy a campsite inconsistent with the regulations of this chapter unless specifically authorized by a formal declaration of the city manager in emergency circumstances or upon council resolution. The council may exempt a special event from the prohibitions of this chapter if the council finds such exemptions to be in the public interest and consistent with the council goals and notices and in compliance with conditions imposed by the city manager. Any conditions imposed will include a condition requiring that the applicant provide evidence of adequate insurance coverage and agree to indemnification of the city of any liability, damages, and expenses incurred by the city as a result of the activity of the applicant. Any findings by this council shall specify the exact date and location covered by the exemption. This is primarily, if you think of it, for like special events. Say, for instance, it hasn't happened for a while, but say Cycle Oregon. Cycle Oregon used to come in and take over Riverside Park, and they allowed camping in Riverside Park for that event. So that's just an example of maybe an exception. Moving on, under this same thing, camping regulated, B, unless otherwise authorized by law, or 5.61030A, which is what we just read, it is unlawful to place camping materials, store camping materials, or otherwise establish a campsite for any period of time at the following city properties. 1, streets, sidewalks, alleys, parking lots, any location intended for vehicular traffic, any locations with footpaths intended for pedestrian travel, within 100 feet of the entrance to any building, within 100 feet of any playground, within 100 feet of any athletic field, within 100 feet of any skate park, or within 100 feet of any body of water. 2, inside of any city building not specifically designed and being operated at that time to allow the storage or placement of camping materials. It goes on, 3 through 12 also states it is not allowed in Reinhardt Park, Morrison Park, Riverside Park, Fruitdale Park, Eckstein, Gilbert, the skate park, Greenwood, Long Ridge, Loveless, Redwood, West Home, the pool, and Depot Park. C, even where the temporary placement of camping materials is authorized, at least once every 24 hours, an individual that has placed camping material on city property must relocate. Continuing, C, even where the temporary placement of camping materials is authorized, at least every 24 hours, an individual that has placed camping must be relocated. That's just a repeat of my note. And that concludes draft 1 option. That was the exclude. Now let's look at what the include ordinance option looks like for council's recommendation. This is the same as 5.61030 in option 1, so I'm not going to reread it, but it is the same language. We move on now. Unless otherwise authorized by law, under the slide we just mentioned, the only location where it is lawful to place camping materials or stored camping materials for any period of time on city property are the following locations. Now you're listing where it's lawful for someone to provide camping material. That's the WTP is the water treatment plant, J Street, which was discussed. That would be a temporary location. Croxton, Kesterson, Martin, Ogle, Stansfield, Tussing, and Baker Park are those listed. Goes on, C, even where the temporary placement of camping materials is authorized, it remains unlawful to place camping materials or store camping materials for any period of time on any street, sidewalk, alley. It's very similar to the language I mentioned before. Inside of any city building not specifically designed, that's very similar language to the previous code also. It goes on, D, even where the temporary placement of camping materials is authorized at least once every 24 hours, the individual that has placed camping materials on city property must relocate. When a vehicle is used as a place to sleep or as a temporary place to live in or immediately adjacent to any other locations listed in the listed items on the previous slide, the vehicle must be legally parked. A vehicle parked in any of these locations must relocate prior to the expiration of the 24 hours, regardless of the intended purpose of its use. And that concludes options 1 and 2 as provided to you. Next, it's up to really council's discretion with legal counsel's recommendation that we adopt a time, place, and manner code sometime in August. Alternatives would be to provide direction on desired code options for future council action or move to an additional workshop to further discuss or develop policy recommendations. With that, Mayor, I turn it over to you for questions.
Thanks, Aaron. Council, what questions do you have? Dwayne?
I have a question on the property next to police station that's beneath the building tore down. I think that's on 7th Street. How long would it take to tear that building down?
Are you talking about the old exterminator pest place?
Yes. Yeah.
The timeline on tearing it down, Jason might be able to know, it's probably cost around 30 to 50 or something along those lines.
I don't remember. We had gotten cost estimates. I'd have to look that up, but we'd probably be a couple of months by the time we got an RFP out or got quotes back and the work done and scheduled. I'd guess 2 months.
To tear that building down in 2 months.
That might be fast tracking it.
I guess that's
If you
government
direct
work.
us to get it done, we'll get on it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Val?
Yes, on this ordinance number 2, I just have a question in terms of it says, even when the temporary placement of camping materials is authorized at least once every 24 hours, an individual that has placed camping materials on city property must relocate. So I'm assuming that means they have to go to a different park, because relocate meant going to a completely different place. So am I correct on that assumption? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted clarity on that.
Other questions? Joel?
So with the water treatment plant, were there any potential improvements for it to be used in this function, such as bathrooms or fences or anything like that?
Yeah, currently, right now, that is not an open space for public use, so that is unique to the other locations that were cited in the code. So we would need to ramp up some additional services there, whether it be some hand washing stations, restrooms, and potentially some security fencing if we wanted to have some kind of controlled access to the space of the 7.7 acres that we have.
Any other questions? Valerie?
There are no restrooms at Croxton, I don't think Kesterson, Ogle, Stansfield, or Martin. Am I correct?
Yes.
So does that mean that those would also need to be placed there, or how does that work?
Not necessarily, and that's not something that would be potentially recommended. However, that is an issue with having more use of those areas for potential camping. We are already experiencing some feces and waste in some of those locations currently right now because they don't have restrooms. So there are a number of park spaces, open space parks that we have that do not have restrooms that are being used, and we are currently experiencing issues with that. So that may create a larger issue.
Well, and I would expect Croxton is actually where a lot of students do go through to school at Lincoln that live on 9th and back behind that. So I can see that as being a problem.
Yeah, and one of the things that we looked at from a standpoint of just trying to provide council was something that provided for additional information on choosing or looking at parks and what to include, what not to include, is to really look at parks that, any park that had any kind of playground facility or youth recreational activity associated with it was not put on that list as an option. So if it had a playground, if it had a ball field, those kind of things, anything associated with youth activity was not included on the list. And just going through the parks that's sort of the list of what we came up with. So there's just something that was, at least we could define as why those things were listed the way they were.
Joel?
So there's other public areas, government-owned areas by the city with the park. And for example, I saw Beacon Park, which I guess is not classified as an official park, and it wasn't listed on either list. Was there a rationale for that?
Those are reserve lands. They're not open parks to the public. They're reserve land. So they're for future development at some point in time. But they were not listed because they're not technically open or ready for public use.
So those reserve lands, could they also function on either list? Because they are open as right now, if we remain silent on them, to camping. Is that correct?
You could, but there would be infrastructure that would need to be put on those also.
Sure.
And you are, just like the water treatment plant, when you have a site that's not open for general public use and you're starting to designate it, so if you opened up a reserved piece of property for this type of purpose, you are stepping deeper into the state-created danger issue.
Sure.
So that's something that needs to be weighed with council.
Sure, and we need to consider that, okay? But it also needs to be considered. So the reason you didn't consider it was because of the state-created danger?
Yes, that is an issue, that risk
And
associated with that.
so that's why it's not on either of the lists. But right
Well-
now, if we remain silent on it, it is open, is that correct?
No, it's not open.
It's public land.
It's public land, but it's reserve land. We do not have those lands open for public use. We don't have
So they're
public
closed-
access
so
to
they're
them. They're
closed to
not
all the
maintained
public.
for public access.
Okay, so they're closed to all the public then, you say? Nobody can go on those lands?
Yeah, some of them look like they're still residential pieces of property.
Well, I understand that, and then some of them don't. Okay, yeah, Dollar Mountain's another one that's not on either list. Okay,
It's similar to when we used to have River Road Reserve. We wanted, people wanted it, the aircraft people wanted to go out and do aeronautical stuff.
sure.
It was reserve land. It was not set up for public use. At the time, then, council developed a contract, and I was asked to develop a contract with them so they can have public use on the reserve land. But it was not technically public parkland.
Sure, but it was open for public use also.
Once that agreement was in place for that specific purpose,
I'm
with
just talking about
with an
people-
identified location.
Yeah, I was just talking about people that rode their bicycles or walked their dog.
It's similar
Things like
to, it's similar to federal land that is public land but not open to the public.
So there's a statute then that closes it to the public?
No.
So what is?
You have the ability to open the land if you so desire.
Right. Okay,
Can I add one comment to that, Mr. Kubik?
Yes.
I think one of the things that he's highlighting shows one of the ways that option 2, which is the list that includes what is where it is permissible to sleep and rest, set up to get out of the elements for up to 24 hours, is slightly superior, because what he's identifying is not the only piece of city property that would fall into that definition that wouldn't be on either one of these lists. And by definitions here, that option 2 says these are the places where that conduct is permissible and everything else is not. And so it is superior in that clarity for those types of lands that you're referring to.
Are there any further questions? Joel?
so Aaron, would it be an option then to list those park reserve lands in either category if desired?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
think, and as to, so like on option 1, like you could put the public reserve lands in, still go the exclusion route and add them to it. My understanding would be that there may be some difficulty around really identifying those with an address like we were able to do with the parks. There may be some other, language pieces to it that may be more difficult, but yes, in concept, it could be either excluded or included since it is city property.
Okay, and Aaron, if we remain silent on the issue, then it is open even, or do you see a statute that closes it to all public use?
I think it is much cleaner off limits without being specifically addressed in option 2. Because in option 2, you're listing where it is allowed and everywhere else is not allowed.
Sure.
So silence on option 2 has the effect of excluding it. Silent on option 1, and you're not identifying it, I suppose somebody could try to take up camp out there and then argue, well, it's not on the exclusion list, it's city property, and therefore it is one of the permissible places. And then I think you get into exactly what Mr. Kubik's saying, which is, but that's not open to anybody. That's not public land open to anybody. And so there could be an argument about that and other properties. And option one is a little more superior in just that piece of it, because you are identifying the locations where it is excluded 24/7, 365. You're not telling people exactly where to go, and those experiencing homelessness are allowed to make a lot more decisions about where they're congregating and who they're congregating with and when they're congregating, and you're allowing a little more freedom in those dynamics, but you're also not directly answering the question of here's the list of places that you're going to go.
Understood. Thank you, Aaron.
Brian?
Yeah, I have another question for you, Aaron. If we have a property that we want to use, but we only want to use a specific portion of the property, is there a way to include language like this site, but in the designated area or something along those lines?
Yes.
Thank you.
You can.
Any other questions at the moment? All right, thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Mayor, Council.
Ready to go into discussion here. Dwayne?
I'll just tell you my opinion that I don't like any of these options on here. I mean, on these names on here, maybe a couple, but I think that there's better options. I would be for the water treatment plant. I think it's called the Texas property or the Parkside Fire Station, the dirt behind the Parkside Fire Station. There's a dirt location right there. Give them, that would be a designated, these are option 2. I want to go off of option 2. There's a lawn on the Hillcrest Fire Station that would give them to allow them the 24-hour. And I talked about it earlier, that lot next to the police station where the house is at, and I'd like the house to be demolished, but those would be my 4 choices only. If we're going to use anything, I am not for any parks other than that little Texas piece up by the Parkside. I think those are all valuable places. They give time, place, and manner, and that are objectively reasonable. Obviously, we can adjust due to our population or less population by using those areas, and I'm open for that discussion. Thank you.
Brian?
I like where your head's at, Dwayne. I am not inclined to work off of this property list that we were given in the ordinance. We didn't ask for these properties to come forward. We actually asked for different properties to come forward. But I agree with Dwayne. The water treatment plant site, temporarily, while there's not construction going on, is a good site. The property in between Baker Park and the fire station, which technically is not, I don't think that's actually Baker Park. I think it's like reserve parkland. But yeah, the area immediately behind the station, there's a big flat area. That is another really good spot. As Dwayne said, there's a lot adjacent to the police station. I agree with him that that's a good spot. The grassy area at Hillcrest, I can be on board with in the interest of having enough sites. And the only one that I might consider that you didn't mention was Riverside West is actually 2 tax lots, and there's a smaller tax lot the farther away from the river. And since that site has been used a lot and we're looking for objectively reasonable, I would potentially include the smaller tax lot at Riverside West for continued camping. It's up closer to the building. I think one of the sites needs to be quote unquote an incentive site. And we've had some discussions about this, a site where we would make it a little bit easier for people to stay so we can have them, not all over the place. So I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I would assume that an incentive site would allow for people to camp a little bit longer than at the other sites. It would have security. It would be a place for the nonprofits to come provide services on a more regular basis. Obviously, it would have bathrooms and trash service. I think the water treatment plant probably makes the most sense to be that site. Although, again, it is a temporary site since, 9 months from now, they're going to be starting construction. But for the time being, I think it works. I'll leave it at that for now.
Rob?
Yeah, I'm in almost complete agreement with both Dwayne and Brian. I think that the concept of incentivizing or allowing people to potentially stay in one site longer than another, I think has many, many benefits. Essentially, if someone is truly involuntarily homeless and they actually are willing to accept a hand up, if that's possible, to get out of that situation, and they are essentially behaving like good citizen in any one of these locations, I'd like them to be able to stay there so that they're easier to monitor and it's easier to provide services to them. I see no reason to make them leave every 24 hours and then we end up with just an unmanageable situation around town. So if someone is, and I'm not sure how we would define that, it could be our community response team that defines that, but if somebody is essentially living within they're essentially a good citizen within one of those sites, I absolutely could believe they should be able to stay there, whether it's 72 hours or whether it's a week, again, because the service providers know where to find them. And that's the most practical way to help these people get out of the homeless situation. So I think that the sliver of Baker Park that Brian talks about, I think is doable. I think, frankly, the property just north, the exterminator property that the city owns, I believe council already voted on that to say that we were going to demolish it at some point rather than rebuild it. And I think that should also be a site where people could stay longer. I can imagine people who are in the parks now that may be really fearful, that are essentially law-abiding people that have been taken advantage of in the parks. I think for them to provide a place right next to the police station, I think is very reasonable. I think it would be very attractive for some people. And to have that be one of the quote-unquote incentivized sites, I think would also be a very, very reasonable, objectively reasonable, but very fair for the people who have those concerns, those real safety concerns. So, I was a little bit taken aback with the fact that it could take 2 months to knock that building down. It's just impossible for me to imagine that anyone in the private sector would ever take that long. But, and city staff has staff on, essentially on retainer to handle situations like that. So I really believe that would be a really good spot, again, because it's not too far from a walking distance from a grocery store. So the two options that we were given, again, I'm not sure, who decided we were only going to get two options, but I'm not in agreement with I'm in agreement with the exception of the specific places, which I'm in agreement of none of what was presented to us. All the rest of the language, I think, is very well done. I think it's very detailed. It's very well thought out. And the rest of the language, but as far as the specific locations go, I'm in agreement with none of the ones that we were presented with, and I am in agreement with what Brian and Dwayne were in favor of.
Rick?
I'm also in agreement with a lot of the comments are made at this point and helping give direction. in favor of the water treatment plant. On Riverside West, I guess I would like to see if that came as one of the locations that a fence would be erected to confine that specific area, to help separate Riverside east from west. And I would be willing to consider, as Rob mentioned, on the police station, because a lot of people might take that up just because of extra safety. So those would be my comments. Thank you.
Valerie?
I think basically what you're hearing is the council really has listened to the public, and we know how bad they want their parks back. And I think everybody up here knows how bad we want you to have your parks back, because parks are not meant for what they've been used for. So I think that's really the sense of what you're getting from the council, is that there are other properties. We know we have a lot across right out here that, you know, it's on A Street, I mean, it's on 6th Street, but, you know, we're beyond worrying about people seeing things. They go down, you know, and they see it at Riverside West right now. I mean, we need to look for other sites. And obviously, we're going to need to get in touch with nonprofits and work as a community. I think this is really a community thing that needs to come together. We need to work with a community response team, because I know we want it to be easier on our police than currently it is. But what you're hearing is us saying that we don't really want them in the parks either, and that we would rather try to find other properties that will fit the bill. Because personally, and I know the state of danger, and I know, Aaron, if as you're listening to me, you know, and I know that's something that legally we should all worry about, but I think right now that our parks are a state of danger. And unfortunately, the people who are going to be hurt are the people that are totally innocent and are far away from the problem. And so I think that myself, and I think the rest of the council, is willing to step into that and take that risk, assuming that there will be still some community response activity that goes on, and checking some sort of security, some sort of porta potties, washing stations available. So that's where I feel that the sense of this council is we want the parks back, and we want to use other city property. If that means designated certain parts of it, I think we've all thought that moving 24 hours is impossible for some of the handicapped people who are in our parks. There are people who truly need help. And so by incentivizing a spot where people can know who they are and get them help, and they are signed up to get that help, I think that needs to be included in this. But, you know, just having these down here, I personally like the inclusion better than the exclusion. So I think option 2 is a better idea, but I would like to see it taken out of the parks and use a water treatment plant, use Riverside West, because I think that is down by Mint, so that's really accessible for Mint in their position. Using some, I know Ashland uses their police station land by their police and fire. Or I'm also, and as much as I've fought long and hard for Beacon Park, I also do know there's an area that could probably be fenced off just up Hillcrest, just one section, for a place to be used. And I'm willing to give that up, to say until something better comes up, I'm willing to take the risk and take it out of our parks and put it on some other property.
Joel and then Rick?
So the other thing that's important, and they don't go against each other, they go together, the people, all the people of our community. And so our parks are public land, and they belong to the public to recreate in them, and then there's other places where people that need help can go. And some of those can be public lands as well. And that good balance is reasonable, and we need to be sensitive to that. And the incentives, like out at the water treatment plant, are part of that. And the nonprofits and their existing services are part of that. It's a very important part of that. And The only other disagreement I have location-wise is Baker Park, the part there adjacent to Baker Park, because there's been several fires set in that area. And there's 10-foot high grass, and our fire danger is only going to get worse. On one of the fires, it tied up all of our engines. And there's been some activity down there with a lot of propane bottles exploding and those kind of things. And so I would have that off limits. I wouldn't, it's right next to the river and the boat ramp as well, so.
Rick and then Dwayne.
So I'm also in favor of option 2, inclusion. On Baker Park, I would prefer, if it were there, that it would be in an area where there is not tall grass. And there is a section there that would be on the south side next to an existing building, and that might be an area that would be safer. Also, when we look at the water treatment plant and other pieces of property, is there a possibility of designating a park status there temporarily, like for 12 months or 18 months? Because that would help maybe some of the clarification of the status when we're looking at sites. Because Aaron Heisel would, in designating a park, would that help us on the liability issues?
I don't believe that that would work. Aaron can weigh in, but this is a water treatment plant site. It's planned for a water treatment plant site. To temporarily say it's a park, I don't think you'll be skirting anything. And even if it is a park, if you're still designating that as that area that's preferred for 72 hours, et cetera, I don't know what you get around.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. The distinction of park, no park doesn't change the objectively reasonable nature of it. You're not regulating at all people sleeping or resting with any of this, and that's by design, that's intentional. This is only regulating the placement and storage of camping materials on city property and for what length and where and those types of things. So the temporary sleeping or resting that somebody might do in a park, regardless of their housing situation, they're still invited to do that in any one of your parks under either one of the options being presented here.
Dwayne and then Rob.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not in favor of Baker Park. The spot that I was talking about is up by the fire station, and it's dirt. And I'm pretty sure that propane tanks are not allowed in any of our city properties or anything like that, or fire. And, the whole goal here is to be objectively reasonable by the state statute. That's what I feel that everybody here is looking at as objectively reasonable. What would a reasonable person think with the state law for time, place, and manner? And I think that's what our goal should be, and our direction should be, and sticking to that. We might not even need 4 or 5 spots. We might only need 3. We're going to find that out here once we, begin this. So, and we can adjust, add, take away. Hopefully we take away. That'd be nice, but we'll find out. The reason why I picked some of the positions I picked is I think they're really close to security. We have, a lot of our incidents are dealt with firefighters and police officers. So what better place to be next to is firefighters and police officers. I'll take the blame if they don't like it, but they can respond pretty fast. It's going to be right there. Then our also goal is to try to keep it away from housing as much as possible too. That's really a good goal, is to try to keep it away from how, I know we can't do everything perfect, but when I was looking through these lists and, talking, and my goal was to keep it away from residential housing as much as possible. And that's hard. Businesses too. Where do you go without interrupting businesses? Because I know I've gone other places, and if it's something's next to a business, it can, mess with the business and what they're doing there and trying to, customers. So, this is really hard to find something that's reasonable, objectively reasonable, that gives time, place, and manner with the state law. And that's my whole goal here. And I'm honestly glad that most of us, I think, all agree that that's what we're trying to do. And we don't always agree on everything up here, but I think that most of us have had really good conversations. Hopefully you'll be proud of us, because I think that's what we're trying to do. So thank you. That's all I have to say.
Rob?
So a couple things to say, but first, a question for the chief. It was asked the other day, but we never circled back to it. Do you have a perception, since the Supreme Court ruling, are there now less unhoused people in our parks or in Grants Pass than there were prior to that? And maybe by what percentage or whatever?
I can't give you a comment like less people, but what I can tell you is because we do keep numbers on how many tents we tag per week, that number has decreased.
Okay, so just essentially the ruling is to somewhat moving towards solving our problem, or at least a step in that direction. That's a good thing. So now I have, for council, I have to really question, by setting up these sites, I'm going to assume, and it may be shown to be incorrect, but I'm going to assume, but when we actually set these sites up and we get it dialed in, I think that the number may also go down a little bit again. It's just, I just think that might be human nature, quite frankly. But given that likelihood, do we want to have essentially 24-hour limitations for people in these sites, now that we are narrowing it down as to what the sites might be? I don't feel bad about having people in those sites for longer than 24 hours because they don't really seem to be that close to residential for the most part, which I think is everyone's a top priority anyway. They're not particularly close to most businesses, if any, just a couple. I don't know that we have an advantage here of making it only 24 hours. Now, it may cause some of the unhoused to choose to leave town, but if they're there, I think that it's easier for the police to monitor them if they're in one place, even if it's 48 hours. I think it's easier for service providers to know where to find them. So I don't know that 24 hours, in my way of thinking, is an advantage for the city or the citizens of the city. We may want to have as a minimum 48 hours and maybe incentivize some for a little bit longer than that, because I don't really want to see them moving around if it's to no one's advantage. So I'd like to consider a 48-hour kind of minimum with maybe 72 or longer in the two incentivized sites, and I'd like to see one of those be next to the police station for those people who really feel the security of being near the police station. I'd like to see that be, more like 96 hours or longer. So I'm looking at kind of 48 and 96 as the two working time frames.
Dwayne?
I just have a clarifying question. Well, I probably have more, but so currently the way the thing reads is 24 hours is when they get their notice, their first notice of 72 hours. Am I correct? Because the state law says they get 72 hours once they've been posted. So the first 24 hours is, there's not much we could do in these areas. Law enforcement comes up and says, hey, it's been over 24 hours or 24 hours, whatever it is. I marked you 72 hours. So they're going to get 4 days no matter what with this. You're asking for more than that, Rob? Is that what you're asking?
I don't know. I guess if there are some people who actually, do move when the police come around and say, you got to get out of here, and people do feel the need to move and it causes them a lot of stress. I'm not interested in causing, we'll call them law-abiding homeless people that aren't causing a problem. I don't really want to stress them out. I don't see the advantage to that. But I don't see the advantage, and I also think it's probably a little bit more work for the police to have 24-hour noticing rather than 48. And I understand 48 turns into a lot longer than that. I get that. But in the locations we're choosing, I don't think that's a big negative in the locations we're choosing.
Dwayne?
I would be okay with one site being, obviously, this is just, my opinion, being a little bit longer, whatever we agree upon that. Like, I think Brian, and we've had the discussion before, is incentivizing people to get out of homelessness. I think we should designate at least one spot that's a longer spot, and people that are working with whatever services they are, and they, and obviously, me as a counselor is not gonna go around there and check that, but I'm figuring that we have smart people working for the police department and the groups out there that can figure that out, and if there's a problem, I guess they could figure it out that this person's not working towards success, and I'd be okay with that, at least one spot, and then the other ones maybe less. I don't know what, what that would look like, but if we could have something,
So you're saying that if they essentially got some kind of credit somehow that they actually were being constructive and working towards, then essentially the 72 hours would start again or something like that?
I would think that we can figure out something that we can all agree upon, that there's a incentivized something for progress moving forward, that you're not, you're not the bad actor that we kind of all don't like. I think that we really can't, we shouldn't be incentivizing bad actors, but we should be incentivizing people that are maybe elderly, or they have a job but they can't find housing. And I know there's a couple in the park that, because I've talked to them, they have a job but they can't find a place of housing. So I think there's to be a give and take. I think that'll be objectively reasonable. We should be using those words. I think most people have some humanity inside them, that, hey, there is good people out there, and then we want to do good, and we'll see how that works. Whatever that is, I think we should come up with something like that.
All right, Brian, then Rick, then Rob.
There's still a fair amount to discuss, so I don't know if structure-wise, if we want to maybe kind of get to a consensus on the sites, because there's some other details that I want to bring up, and I don't want to just turn it into a big mess. So I don't know what you think about that, Mayor.
Sure, I guess, I don't know what other things you want to bring up, but I think we've heard a similar number of sites. You may just need to take a little vote on each site and see where we end up. Maybe if we end up with a majority for each site mentioned. So, because I've heard water treatment plant, the Texas property by the Parkway Station, the Hillcrest Lawn, and then the exterminator building on 7th Street next to that police station, and the Riverside West upper area. So anyway, but did you have anything other than just process right now?
Yeah, but I'll hold off.
Okay. Rick and then Rob.
I think if we can keep it simple, actually makes the administration a lot easier too. So I guess I would be in favor of the water treatment plant being an extended site, and then the rest just be the regular, as Dwayne was pointing out. Thank you.
Rob.
So I have a question for, I guess, Aaron Kubik, and this, somewhere on these documents, it says it's an emergency ordinance, and, the moment council agrees, it would take effect. So we're talking about an emergency ordinance, basically. The fact that this is an emergency, how can that hasten the removal of that building, the exterminator building? We are dealing with an emergency, and how can that hasten the removal of that building?
Sure. Like Jason mentioned, there's some permitting processes that would need to be followed. We would be no quicker nor any slower than a private entity trying to do the same thing when it comes to the demolition of a structure. We still have to follow the same requirements that a private party would have to follow. If council desired to have that building gone in as quick as possible, we would make that happen. And we would proceed with getting the permits to demo it, identifying the funding to demo it, and get that demoed on a time frame that would provide for a quick return to allow that location to be utilized for a potential site for resting.
All right. Anybody else have anything? Do you want to decide on locations now, or do you want to talk about some of the other surrounding issues? Val?
Okay, this is just kind of not, I was just looking at all the sites that Aaron Heisel had put for us, and they were all pretty small sites. So I don't know, you know, if in choosing those sites, there was any particular acreage you thought that was important to keep, or those were just randomly checked out? Because I know Croxton is not very big. I know Kesterson's not very big. Martin's not very big. Stansfield, I can't even think of where it is. Ogle is just a corner lot. So a lot of those are pretty small parks.
They are small, and it wasn't broken down by acreage. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it was basically broken down by looking at the park infrastructure. What parks had playground equipment or anything associated with children were just immediately taken off the list. And so that left a small list of the parks that you saw in the list. And primarily that this was just an opportunity for us to have that discussion and a starting point for discussion for council tonight, which seems to have worked, and we're making progress.
Okay. All right, I was just wondering if there was any acreage.
I think Stansfield is the G Street one across from the Climate City. Oh, that's Debo. Okay, that one's Debo. Which one's Stansfield? It's another tiny one. It's also in G, maybe further down. Martin's on Bridge Street.
I just want to make clear, though, that what council's intent is to identify, like the mayor mentioned, there was 4 or 5 sites that were discussed. I have 4 down that seem to be more consistent with people's conversations, and have those sites identified as inclusion in option 2, and then we would pull all the other ones that were listed in inclusion off and replace them with these 4 or 5 as you ultimately identify. We'll move forward with option 2, inclusion with those items.
Brian?
Well, this might be the easiest way to do it. I'm going to make a motion to bring forward at a future business meeting 5 sites for this ordinance in the inclusionary model. Those sites being the designated area at Baker adjacent to the Parkway Station, the south tax lot of Riverside West, the tax lot adjacent to the police station, the grassy area between the Hillcrest Fire Station and Les Schwab, and the water treatment plant facility. Yeah.
Okay, seconded by Rick. Any discussion on that? Yeah, Aaron.
I just had a question because I heard 2 things. One, I heard that on Riverside West, we would provide an opportunity for them to have the small portion, the small parcel next to the U-turn for Christ. And now I just heard it was the big parcel, not the small parcel. So
I may have misspoke. It is the small parcel
Okay,
on the
all right, thank
southern
you.
side.
Okay.
Yeah.
He said south tax lot.
Can I,
Go ahead, Aaron.
I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Aaron
I'm
has,
sorry, I just want kind of clarity on that Riverside, that west side of Riverside. My very limited understanding of how that would be split is by tax lot, which is going to be hard for the police to designate without any kind of visual barrier. And I'm wondering if the 100 foot from a body of water is cleaner or clearer and still gets to council's intent on that lot? Or is there some place designating in a distance from the water or something that would be easier than saying this tax lot versus that tax lot on that same piece of property, west side of Riverside?
Well, the way, I mean, that particular lot, there is a visual barrier as well. It's a higher elevation. There's kind of like, I think like a line of trees there. But also part of this that we haven't gotten to yet is some of these sites are going to need like privacy fencing to make it clear that this is the area. And that's one of the sites where we would probably have it at least on the long side, so that it's clear where the designated area is.
Yeah, and that's, Councilor De La Grange is correct, Aaron. There is truly a visual physical barrier that identifies that, which is much cleaner than trying to do a certain footage from a waterway or something along those lines. So I think it's relatively easy for us to partition the south parcel closest to U-Turn for Christ.
Okay, thank you.
Joel?
The other thing I'd like us to consider, and I would be in favor of Brian's motion also, but to add to it the 100 feet from any body of water, because like down there by Baker Park or in other areas,
It's already in there, Councilor.
it's already in there.
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about it. Okay, good. I can sleep tonight.
Okay, we have a motion to consider 5 locations. I think you all know what they are, so I probably don't need to repeat them, but is there any discussion on those 5 locations? All right. Brian, you made the motion. How do you vote?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes,
Dwayne?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
All right. Looks like we have our location, 6-0. Other topics? Brian?
So in section C, there are some potential issues with the 100-foot buffer. Some of these sites, let's take, for example, the Hillcrest grassy area. I'm pretty sure that entire area is within 100 feet of a sidewalk. So, and then there are other issues, you know, Baker, or not Baker, the Texas property, I guess I'll call it. There is a bike path immediately adjacent to the designated area, so 100 feet from that wouldn't work. So I don't know that we need to like completely resolve that right now, but I just wanted to make it clear that there are issues with the language currently in there with the sites that we've chosen. So that will need to be addressed.
Okay.
So another issue, well, not necessarily an issue, but I guess a choice we need to make is, in a previous meeting, it was explained to us that law enforcement cannot give notice and cite at the same encounter. There has to be like a 2-hour window between those two things happening. To me, it makes sense to notice first, so that they have an opportunity to vacate, and then if it allows, come back and cite second. And I don't know if we need to be that specific or if that's something that we should leave to police discretion, but I just thought that I would call it out in case anyone else has an opinion on that. Including the chief.
I think if you're asking my opinion, I think it should be left to police discretion. And we do have the ability to move people along after 24 hours. So, and then if you even go back in time and think about how we even got here in the first place, we weren't citation heavy. We never have been citation heavy. We've always supported people thriving and focused on education versus the citation piece. And it's very clear who's going to follow the rules versus somebody that's not, and those people that are not will be held accountable appropriately via citation. So all of that to say, I would prefer to be left in our hands.
Very good. Thanks, Chief.
Dwayne?
I think this is a question. These sites we just voted on, will the rules we had in the park with scattering rubbish and all that stuff still be part of that area thing?
things that cause fires and all that stuff still be part of the rules?
Yes.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Brian?
I just have one other thing. We've talked a little bit about providing incentives at one site, so if people are allowed to stay longer and they show that they are actively trying to improve their situation, I guess I don't have an answer for that, but I think maybe before we have our next meeting, ask staff and police and even Aaron possible ways for us to have a metric to incentivize, because I don't know, that's something that I'm not quite sure how to do.
So that's a good question, and Aaron and the chief can chime in also. My concern is my initial shot at this is that would start to turn the city into case management work. And I think if you were to incentivize, in my opinion, you should probably designate a site or two or whatever you want to designate and say 72 hours. And that's the incentive, is they can stay 72 hours and not 24 hours. For us to try to determine, are they bettering themselves or they're not bettering themselves, how's this person, I think would be it's going to require additional resources, and how far do we want to go with that? So that's my initial first take, is I think you should just designate this site, and how you're incentivizing is 72 hours. Of course, we can still manage conduct. If they're not adhering to the rules that we currently have, like if they're scattering rubbish, if they're, that kind of, then we can still deal with that. So as long as they're keeping their site clean, they're clean, and they're in compliance, and their conduct is appropriate, then that's probably about as far as I'd recommend, I think, but.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on, Aaron Heisel, go ahead.
No, go ahead, chief.
Sorry for interrupting. My thought to kind of continue with the conversation is, if we remember when we built the tiny homes, community response team were engaged all the time. So we were referring people, we were working with, and I see some familiar faces in the crowd, Path, Mint. We always work together, and we always have only had ourselves to rely upon, and I think we will see progress with people that want to engage in services. And for people that don't, we will continue to issue citations. To Councillor Junker's question, we've been issuing citations for years and years. Sometimes people forget that. Ballot Measure 110, the decriminalization, goes away September 1, and we will be citing and arresting and diverting people as well. So there's lots of changes afoot that may complement how we move forward.
The one thing I'll comment is just as to the way this is set up too, is that there is a very robust and unique set of mitigation that includes if they engage with services after getting a ticket and before whatever hearing they have with the court. That final language that's there, the state law allows for a violation to be, the penalty to be something other than a fine, and does not give a lot of direction to that, other than it can't be imprisonment, it can't be an arrest, but it can be anything other than that. And although that's not ideal for kind of the concerns that are being raised for, like, what about somebody with a disability or somebody that is older or those types of things, it is also problematic to ask the police department to do some kind of selective enforcement. Well, if they have a good story to tell you, then don't give them the ticket, even though the conduct's the same. And then, there's issues around that part of it too. And so this is where those balances were addressed were in the mitigation, the allowing the court to, not assess a fine, create other alternatives. They can require them to go check in do some kind of assessment with a service provider or something along those lines as part of it, or as the entirety of any kind of penalty for those things. So I just wanted to say that that's where those concerns were kind of addressed in the current language.
Okay, thank you for that input. Given that input and the ability, I think we have less ability to incentivize in that regard. I would be willing at one specific site, probably the water treatment plant site, to allow for a longer period of time, even up to 1 to 2 weeks personally, just so people aren't moving around as much and so they can get some stability. So if they are working with case management, that they have time to work on their situation a little bit more than just a few days at the one incentive site. I do have some concerns about the 24-hour at the other sites, because in practice, that's really only 24 hours more than they can already camp anywhere else. So there's not a big gap there. They could camp at Lawn Ridge for 3 days, or they could camp at one of these sites for 4 days. So I would probably be in favor of moving that to 48 hours, just so there's a little bit more gap, so they see a little bit more difference in between, or a little bit more benefit to camping at one of these sites as opposed to illegally camping for 3 days in one of the parks.
I just want to ask one question of Aaron Heisel. Aaron, the way the code is written in this inclusion, if the parks, none of the parks included inclusion, does the city have the ability to cite and remove the campsite at 24 hours? If they are establishing a campsite in a park that is not included in the exclusion, what does that process look like?
The ability to immediately cite in the other locations is clear, and the answer to that would be yes. The ability to immediately remove is far squishier, comes with a lot of other issues, and I could not give you a definitive answer. The hypothetical being, you come across somebody that clearly has set up a tent essentially to stay in one of the parks where that would not be allowed, one of these other sites. They would have the authority to immediately address that. They'd have the lawful ability to tell them they can't be there and cite them for it. But the actual seizure of the property, removal of the property, comes with other due process concerns, and potentially this language in House Bill 3115 around quote-unquote established campsites that is potentially still problematic in terms of immediate removal of the property.
Val and then Rob.
Actually, when I raised my hand, I was coming back to the section on the time, place, and matter that about the violations and how it was written in that there was a way to mitigate if they were getting help, that the court would be the one to mitigate. Because I agree with Aaron that, you know, you can only expect your police officers to do so much. They're not caseworkers, they're policemen. And I am in favor of having one park be, say, 72 hours or whatever, but I think in the beginning that's what I'd like to do before we start making and going too much beyond that.
Rob.
So I'm not sure if I understand why Aaron Heisel, couched his answer, or really couldn't give us a definitive answer with regards to how quickly property could be removed. How is pitching a tent in a prohibited area any different than if someone drove their car up on the on the courthouse lawn? Would the car have to be there for days before it could be removed? I mean, I would think, or drive, I mean, that's my point is, or drive the car, leave their car in the middle of the street, abandoned. Would it have to be there for a day before it could be moved? I mean, it seems really basic to me that if you're not allowed there, the police can move the stuff. How is a tent any different than a car?
Aaron, did you want to answer?
Yeah, I'm trying to be careful about what I say in open session versus the more robust conversation we could probably have in an executive session. But for what I'll say now is that the bundle of rights that an individual experiencing homelessness has in their personal property on public property has been and continues to be a moving target in the law as we currently sit. That is the reason I'm unable to give you a definitive answer, and that those things are analyzed on a case-by-case basis. And even to the car example, where you may have other factors that you could articulate, a safety concern or public health hazard is not necessarily present with every tent that's been erected, and timing and place and how it compares to what laws are in place. All of those factors come into play when you're talking about this is here and it's not supposed to be, so I'm going to, as the government, to take it.
All right, we've been talking about incentives and having people be able to stay at one site. It sounds like the water treatment plant site longer. And I've heard everything from 72 hours to 2 weeks. So does somebody want to take a stab at a proposal there and see where it goes? Rob?
Okay, I don't see any, and, you know, other people might have different view, but I don't see any negative to, say, allowing people to stay there a week or even 2. It's not in anyone's backyard. It's not around too many businesses. And if it helps get people, if people are more able to get the help they need, I mean, I'd like to see the, at least that one site be, I'll say 1 week, that before they get any kind of notice, a week, as long as, you know, the police feel they're law-abiding people.
Okay, Rick?
If the emphasis at that site is that the people are under some sort of treatment or other activity to help them progress, I guess I would be willing to consider 2 weeks as well. Thank you.
I think that was what they were just cautioning about, is the distinction about whether people are involved in programs makes it hard to determine. And so the recommendation is just to pick a length of time and not make it conditional on being involved in treatment. Dwayne?
Yeah, I'll just make a motion, see if this goes anywhere. I would move that we, at the, I guess, be the water treatment center for now, they get 96 hours before they get a notice, which will give them another 72 hours, which will put them at 1 week before they are, have to move.
Is there a second? Seconded by Joel? All right, discussion on that? Val?
Yeah, I'm just going for clarification, because I kind of, you know, I feel the same way, but I want to ask the chief what his thoughts are on the role of the police in identifying that time limit and whether somebody's getting help.
Yeah, we absolutely cannot be expected to know how long somebody's been there initially. So if, for example, 1 week, if the CRT come on a Tuesday and they make contact with people, we don't know if they've been there for a week or not. So then we'd have to recontact them the following week, provide them with a notice. So their time there could be much more than 2 weeks. And that's also depending on officer schedule, vacations, sick, etc. Because you will not, it wouldn't, I think, be even appropriate to have our, say, our patrol team monitoring these specific locations. It would be very difficult to manage. So we'd have to leave it to CRT the way they're doing it now. And they post on, I think, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and some people get far more than 72 hours.
So under this proposal here, if you notice them, whatever day you notice them, right? You come back, 96 hours or plus later, and they're still there, you would provide the 72-hour notice to move, and then when you came back, depending on whether they're moved or not, they'd get the notice. Like, is that going to work? Or are you saying that's not going to work?
No, I think it would work. I just
Okay.
want to make sure there's an expectation that if somebody thinks it's 72 hours, it's not going to be 72 hours. There's no way.
that they may be able to stay longer because of the timeline?
Yes, a lot longer.
Okay, but that's not, we're not creating a plan for you that's not going to work.
No, we'll make it work, but the management of it would be the community response team and not our average patrol officer. That would make things very complex.
Yeah, just won't be as precise as this. It would end up being more lenient.
Yes.
Okay. Brian?
I just have a question about, whenever someone gets to their time when they have to move, what constitutes moving? Like if they have all their stuff and they walk down the street and come back, or I don't know if it's, at least in my mind, it's not clear what moving or leaving the site, like can they leave a site and come back the same day? Do we need to be specific about that? I guess maybe this is a question for Aaron Heisel, but yeah, I'm not clear on how that works.
Do you have an answer, Chief, on the practicality?
My understanding was the way the code's written, it would be a different location completely.
Okay.
I guess, how does that work in the field? Do the officers have to find the people in a different location? And, I mean, what if you just went, stayed with your mom for 2 days and came back to the same location?
Potentially that could happen, sure. But I also think though, from what I think I've heard, most people do adhere to it. They may not be happy about moving, and I look out to the crowd maybe for a nod, but they do move for that period of time, and they do listen and have been compliant. So I don't really think that would be an issue.
All right, so we have a proposal out there now. Any further discussion on this 9672? All right, Dwayne, how would you vote?
Yes.
Val?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes?
Rob?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes.
All right, that is decided on. Just kind of a quick little cleanup thing. I don't know that this is something we can dive into right now, but on item C1, where Brian had raised the issue of the sidewalks, in some cases, I think with these 5 locations you've selected, some of the sidewalks right adjacent, let's say at Riverside West or this pest control place over here by the police station are, right adjacent to public sidewalks. A couple of the other places like the water treatment plant, it's maybe not such a concern, but do you just want to give direction to Aaron Heisel to take that into consideration and rework this so that it allows for a different variation than 100 feet? I think especially the one that comes to mind here is the Hillcrest Fire Station area. If you do it 100 feet from the street, you may end up with very little space. Anyway, but without, like I said, without the details, I mean, is that your intent, everybody? Well, just because we have it written in here 100 feet, which I think you generally want, but that there may be some cases like at the Hillcrest Station comes to mind. Riverside West is another one, and then the 7th Street location or Baker Park, if there's a sidewalk or something going through that area and you make people go back 100 feet from the sidewalk, you may be diminishing your camping space. Brian and then Dwayne.
Well, that section was put in there with a different vision of the sites that we were looking at. The sites we're looking at are vastly different. And it's a reduced list, so when I go through my head of these 5 sites, in practicality, it makes sense for that to be 25 feet, or not to have it at all. It might not even be necessary, but any more than 25 feet is going to start to really diminish some of these sites pretty quickly.
Dwayne?
I think Brian answered my question,
Oh,
but
okay.
my thing, but, if there's a fence there, it would change the dimensions for me if there was a fence along the sidewalk. And I don't think you need 100 feet or 25 feet. It'd be
Okay.
different.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need a strong vote on this. We just need to ask that they
Yeah, if we put
review
a,
that
you know, 3-foot
section.
fence along Hillcrest sidewalk, then does it matter? I don't know. I mean,
I think instead of trying to, have the direction, we can try to come up with a solution
Yeah.
that provide an opportunity for those places to be utilized. So we can come back to you with an ordinance that addresses the spirit of what you're discussing.
that sounds great.
Perfect. Okay. Anything further that you wanted to bring up? No? Fences or restrooms, or do you want to talk about that later? Brian?
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning that I think all these sites are going to have some sort of access to restrooms and sanitation services like trash. The incentive side at the water treatment plant, I would like to see, I know that there's a shower trailer in the community, so if somehow that can be incorporated to that site to provide further incentive for people, I think that would be great. Having increased security at that site, I think, is important. That if we want that to be the incentive site, first of all, it's the largest site, so there's probably going to be the most people there. It's also arguably the most isolated site, which I think would, there'd be a call for more security at that site, and I think that that's warranted.
Anything further? Brian?
Motion to adjourn?
All right. Seconded by Val. Any discussion? All right. All in favor of adjourning tonight, say aye. Have a good evening.